Good afternoon and welcome to All About Animals. I'm Sherry Gradator, and it is a glorious 70-degree day in November, which is shocking but wonderful. My guest today is Rebecca Fife from ABC Humane Wildlife Rescue and Relocation.
Yes.
Did I do all of it right?
Yes.
Yeehaw! And there are a couple things we want to talk about. The last time you were here, we touched on the fact that there are many municipalities that have heart traps to people who are bothered by animals of whatever kind and want to trap those animals. And said municipalities then contract with you to come and pick up the animals from the traps and find a place to release them. Now, when we spoke, it was summer, and we were talking about the problems that you get with heat. And now we're in November, and we're going to be looking at the problems you get with cold. But basically, they're the same problem. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I am Joe Public, and I've gone into my municipality, whichever one it is, and I've said, there's a squirrel, it's driving me crazy. It's in my house, and I need to get rid of it. And you, Mr. Municipality, say, we can give you a trap. We can lend you a trap. What doesn't Mr. Municipality say to Mr. Joe Public?
That's a broad topic.
Good.
So the live box traps that you're talking about are cage-style traps where the animal goes in and steps on the pedal. They make them in a bunch of different brands like Tomahawk and Have a Heart. So people might know them by all of those different brand names. And the people might get them from the municipality that lends them out or even drops them off to the resident's home, or they might go get one from the hardware store, or they might borrow it from a neighbor. But in all of those scenarios, it hasn't been set up by an expert, and an expert's not on site to brief the homeowner on what care that animal deserves once it's captured. So in the state of Illinois, technically, a person trapping on their own property with a trap that they bought online, got at the hardware store, borrowed from a friend, they're supposed to request a site permit from the Department of Natural Resources to trap on their own property, but people don't. The vast majority of homeowners who call me and say, I have an animal in a trap that I set myself, they didn't notify the Department of Natural Resources. If their municipality provides it to them, then they don't necessarily need to do that. But if they're just borrowing a trap from a neighbor, getting it at the hardware store, buying it online, then they're supposed to consult the DNR. And the goal in that is that the DNR will have visited their home, talk to them about site conditions, talk to them about what their plan is to deal with that animal once it's in the trap, so they get a little bit of good advice that way. But because people don't contact the DNR, they set up traps without the forethought to say, what am I going to do with this animal in the trap? Is it going to be euthanized? If so, is there a humane plan to do so? Is it going to be released? Is that legal? How am I going to do that? And how quickly do I need to do all of that? What's the law regarding how long I can have that animal in the trap before it's either released or euthanized or transferred to a rehabilitator, whatever the situation is? So homeowners approach it without that information, and it results in me getting a phone call more than I'd like, with someone saying, I've had this animal in my trap for 3 days now because I trapped it on a Friday and I called for advice, but the state's closed all weekend. Now that it's Monday, they told me I have to hire a private company to get out there. So by the time I become aware of it, it can have already been in the trap for 3 days, which is against the law in Illinois. You have to check a trap once each calendar day. And once you realize the animal is in the trap, it needs to be, dealt with by releasing it, surrendering it to a rehabilitator, or having it humanely euthanized within 24 hours. So when I get the call 3 days after the animal was captured, that's already an animal that is in a situation of suffering. Then people fail to make humane plans where the animals can be released by failing to do advanced planning. So for instance, if you have a raccoon living in your chimney and you have the plan in place where you've already ordered the chimney cap to put on that chimney. You can trap that animal while it's in the trap. You can cap that chimney, and that animal can legally be released on your property where the animal doesn't have to be euthanized, where it's probably going to leave on its own. It may tear another hole in your house and you'll be sorry you released it, but chances are good that you can get it out of your chimney, close off your chimney with an animal-proof chimney cap, and then the animal can be released and it doesn't have to be put to sleep. But if people don't learn those processes and do their research in advance, then they have the animal in the trap. It's in the trap 3 days by the time we get the phone call. The chimney cap wasn't ordered, so they're not able to undertake a humane process because they didn't get the expert consulting.
Because they didn't know, absolutely.
They didn't know.
And so that's why we're here.
That's why
We're here to let people know. Now, I live in the woods, and every once in a while I have an invasion of the chipmunk people. And every once in a while I know that I have an invasion of the chipmunk people because I see something going whoosh, and then I see little rice, black rice, and I know who's left it for me. And I do have a humane trap, and I will set it in my house, and I will trap Mr. Chipmunk, and I will take Mr. Chipmunk out. And then I will do a massive search to find out where Mr. Chipmunk came in, because the bottom line is, even if you take Mr. Chipmunk out and release him, if he knows where it is to come in, the chances are, if it's cold outside, he's coming back. I mean, we used to have, when we first moved in, we had a major invasion of white-footed mice. They were everywhere in the house when we moved in. If you went up in the attic, you saw them jumping up and down in the insulation. I mean, like popcorns. And if you sat in the kitchen, the chances were that one would run right across your foot while you were having dinner. There were that many. So I got traps and put them everywhere. And every morning there would be 6 mice, usually 2 to a trap. And I'd put a bathrobe on, and I'd go out in the woods, and I'd turn the mice loose. And by the time I got back in the house, 5 will get you 10, they were back in the house too. So my husband had a solution. He said, take the mice, he said, and put a little bit of paint on their tails with different colors, and say, okay, I let the green ones go in the woods, and I let the blue ones go across the street, and the pink ones over here. Let's see who comes back fastest, and then we'll know where we're not going to. Now, he was being facetious, of course. But we do, if there's anything, and we have in the past, released it right in our woods and animal-proofed the house. But there, you talk about 3 days, it can be a lot more than 3 days. If Mr. Joe Public puts a trap up, and then Mr. Joe Public goes away for 10 days on vacation, and he doesn't disable the trap before he goes, the chances are he's going to come back to a dead animal.
And we see that too, and it's really heartbreaking. We are called out where someone got a trap from their municipality, and they're told to call a private company to deal with the animal once it's been captured. And the person will tell us that they've gone out of town for an extended period of time, and we do occasionally have to go out and remove a deceased animal from a trap, and it's an animal that likely could have been released had it been.
So sad. It is so sad. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what Mr. Joe Public, me, should know if he goes out and he borrows a trap from the neighbor or the township or from anyone. What is the appropriate thing to do?
Sure, absolutely. So we have a 24-hour telephone number. And do you know what the cost to someone who's setting their own trap is to call and talk to one of our state-certified nuisance wildlife control technicians for advice on how to perform a humane process with the trap yourself?
What is it?
0. It's free. It's available 24 hours, and it's free of charge. So if you're going to borrow your neighbor's trap, or get one at the hardware store, or get one from municipality, please call us and let us tell you about what the next step is, or what considerations you need to have made by the time you set it, so that the animal can have the most humane experience.
And that's the whole thing. The whole thing is advanced planning.
Mm-hmm. It is. So if someone wants to call us, we can be reached at 847-870-7175, or on the web at abcwildlife.com. Let's say they don't want to call us. What's the other option? The Illinois Department of Natural Resources can be contacted for a permit to trap nuisance wildlife on your own property. And a local DNR biologist will either talk to you on the telephone or visit your home and help you plan this process.
Because there's a lot involved. I mean, if you've got a raccoon in your attic, you need to know where to set a trap.
Yes.
More than that, you need to know how to set the trap. We talked about the fact that traps need to be set on a piece of wood. As if you put a trap up on the roof, and you're lucky enough to trap a raccoon in said trap, and he's going to be frantic, the chances are he's going to damage the roof.
Or fall off the roof. We get calls from people who set a raccoon trap on the roof and it comes tumbling down. So when our technicians have to set a raccoon trap on the roof, we attach the trap to a board and then attach the board to the roof. And when the screws are removed, silicone goes into the holes to prevent it from leaking, and it's properly repaired. So if people don't also have those type of carpentry skills, then they're not going to want to undertake that themselves, and they might not know that unless they call for the free consultation and we tell them all the steps involved. Some of the people say, I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I appreciate that you shared this with me. I feel that I can do it. And we say, okay, great. Call us back if you have any other questions. The majority of them say, I had no idea that much was involved. I just want you to do it for me. And that's fine too.
And you told me that when you put a trap on a lawn without a board underneath it, say bye-bye lawn.
Yeah. There will be a trench there sometimes with the trap, and the animal, especially a raccoon, will pull every bit of grass that it can reach into the trap, and the trap will be packed with grass and dirt by the time it's picked up.
So, you have an animal, it's bothering you, it's in a place where it ought to be. And please, that doesn't mean you have an animal that's bothering you that's a wild thing, so you've got to get rid of it. Because they have a right, and they have the right to live too. So just because I have a big fat white possum that loves to walk through my yard every single day and make my dog crazy, and she'll bark and I have to be careful because the neighbors are still sleeping. But this possum's out there every day, and I really don't like having him in my yard. That doesn't mean I'm going to trap him and move him. He has a right to be there. Sometimes I will go out and yell at him. And sometimes I'll lock my dog in the house and I'll go clap and I'll bang on a pot. And if he doesn't roll up in a little ball and refuse to move, I can gradually move him toward the fence and he'll go under the fence and he'll be gone. But when we talk about a nuisance animal, we don't talk about an animal that's living in the woods where it belongs. Unless that animal is doing damage to your property, which 47 chipmunks underneath a stoop, a concrete stoop. The stoop has a tendency to drop a little bit. Had that happen too. And that I would almost consider a nuisance.
Yeah.
But when we talk about nuisance animals, they're the ones that have gotten into your house or are doing damage in your yard or are doing damage to your walls. My little chipmunks that came in the house literally ate a hole through my foundation. Right through. And until I found that hole and I was able to seal it, we had little stripy friends, which was no fun at all.
I like that you said that you're out there yelling at possums because it reminded me that coyotes are one of the species of wildlife that we really need to get acquainted to living in proximity with. The state did studies where they radio tagged coyotes to examine their stomach contents to see what they're eating. And they're eating, 98% mice. Coyotes are our partners in rodent control. Mice can carry a lot of diseases, so having coyotes help control the mouse and hopefully the rat population.
And they do also control the Canada goose population because I understand they take a significant percentage of the Canada goose eggs.
That's true. And we like to tell people care about coyotes. They like them. They don't want them killed, but they want them removed. And we tell them, if you care about coyotes and you don't want them to have to be killed, We teach them a fed coyote is a dead coyote. If a coyote is hand fed by people, like there was a factory where they were giving it food every day and it was coming up and trying to feed it people's hands, that's very unsafe. So that coyote maybe can't be left alive because it's acculturated to take food from people. So keep wildlife wild in order to protect the people and the wildlife. So first, never feed wildlife. But the next part is coyotes need to have a healthy fear of people. And just like you're out there shouting at that possum, that's what we need to do when we have a coyote interaction. So if a coyote does appear at the corner of your yard and you duck back inside and act kind of submissive to watch it and you're afraid of it, you're teaching it that it can waltz right through your yard. A better response is, coyote, get out of here, go on, and haze that coyote. You might think that you're being cruel. Well, you wouldn't think that because you know so much about wildlife, but someone else might think they're being cruel to haze that animal. But it's actually the most humane thing you can do for that animal, is to keep it wild and keep it away from people.
Absolutely, you're teaching it. The same thing with deer. You have to teach them that although people are lovely, loving, and we love to watch the deer, there is a healthy, safe distance from which the deer can be watched. And the deer in my neighborhood don't necessarily know what that safe distance is. Their big favorite thing to do is to eat the ivy off the side of the house, and they'll stand right on the sidewalk to do it. But that's how it is. It's okay. It's what it is. We need a segue here, and it's an important segue. Because what we were talking about people who trap an animal and are capable of and willing to release that animal on their own property.
Yes.
The majority of people are not. The majority of people who trap an animal want that animal gone off their property, out of their sight, and away from their world.
That's true.
And you're coming out, whether it's with a contract with a municipality that says to its people, okay, we'll trap them, but you've got to bring them in. What about release sites?
Yeah. Well, only about 70% of relocated animals survive. And I'd like to think that if we very thoughtfully release them, we can increase their odds of survival. And one of the ways that we do that is a release site for squirrels needs to have an abundance of oak trees. A release site for other animals that might dwell in the cavities of hollow trees, the property needs to have mature den trees. It needs to have a good water supply. It needs to be away from other urban areas where it's not going to cause a nuisance situation. And the state law requires that it's within 10 to 40 miles of the capture site. So there are so many strict parameters governing where we can release and the qualities of the property so that it increases survival.
And before we run low on time, how do you get those release sites?
We need people to volunteer their properties. We need people to call us and say, I have 5 acres here. I have 10 acres here. I want you to come out and do a survey and let us know what you think the carrying capacity of our property is. Do you want to release 5 squirrels here? Is it 3 possums? Is it an open grassy field where it's appropriate to release 2 woodchucks? We need to come and do these surveys and make these agreements with homeowners where we can have their permission to release the appropriate wildlife and the appropriate amount of wildlife on their properties.
And the only way you do that is if people volunteer, because they have to be willing to allow that.
Yes.
So, here's the big plea. If you have, and how much acreage do you need?
Any amount.
Any amount. If you're a resident, if you've got some open space, if you are amenable to the concept that these animals will only survive if there's a place to release them, call
847-870-7175 or find us on the web at abcwildlife.com.
It's critical. It's the only way these animals will survive, and you can be part of keeping the woods a combination of trees and creatures, which is what it should be. And we are out of time, or I'm going to get shot if we go any longer, Rebecca.
Thank you, Sherry.
So thank you so much for coming out.
My pleasure.
It was wonderful. If you've got space, if you're willing, we need a place for these animals to go. They need a place to live. And now we'll take you to Save a Pet, and we will show you a bunch of beautiful cats because there aren't any dogs right now.